To truly give you the gift of freedom as you walk along the path of each daily shortcut episode, you'll discover that it's the people who you mastermind with that give you the power to transform your business. You'll take off in your business when you decide to slow down time and connect with other great mentors. When you decide to embrace fully the transformational information from one of my mentors, as we open a new door to a vehicle you can step inside and smile, taking one step and then the other. As we open a new door to a vehicle, as you walk on a stage so we can celebrate you. Pay attention to William Wood in this special episode as he shines a light on the power you have inside so you can immerse yourself in the principles of success, lift your hands in the air, and be free.
I think I was at a Boy Scout camp and I was sitting on the edge of my log staring into the dancing fire. Reds and oranges and yellows all mixed together and moved in some kind of synchronous harmony, like they were dancing to a sound that I couldn't hear. The crackling of the fire and the smell of the smoke were part of the experience. I was listening to a master storyteller tell of an ancient hero, someone who had overcome an incredible obstacle. I literally hung on every word that came out of his mouth. So powerful was the effect of the story. Story is one of the oldest forms of entertainment that exists in humanity. But not only do we tell stories to entertain, but stories also define who we are. They define our culture. They define our histories. They define our families. And we tell stories about ourselves that define who we are and what we do and what we are capable of. What kind of stories are you letting define yourself? What kinds of stories have come to define your character, your future, and your possibilities? Some of these stories we inherit. We hear them from our parents. We hear them at church. We hear them from our culture. Stories about our meaning, stories about our place in the universe, and stories about where we're going and what we're up to. Is your story serving you, or is your story taking you down a path that you don't want to go down? Stories do come true. And we have the ability to tell better stories. I remember a few years back, I brought my family up into the mountains of Idaho. We were looking for some rest and relaxation. It had been a little while since the family had taken some downtime together. We wanted to get to a place beyond cell range. We wanted to get to a place with no TV, no radio, just the mountains and nature. Not too far from the cabin we had rented, there was a river, the Payette River, South Fork, and there was a stretch of river that the people who rented us the cabin told us was friendly to families. They said this little stretch of river should be a good place to put in a raft or put in a canoe and lazily float down the river. Now, we were surprised at just how fast that river actually was. The water moved much faster than we had expected, and yet it was safe. It was just a faster safe. It wasn't rough. There were a few rapids and a few sweepers that were easily navigated. I've been in a canoe since I was a young boy and enjoy going down the water. So I was enjoying this winding ride through the mountains and the forests of Idaho. My little boy was down by my feet at the bottom of the canoe, and he was nervous about the speed of the corners and the sweepers and the rocks and the river, never having navigated such a landscape before. He looked up at me and he said, "This is scary." And the story that he had in his mind was clear to me as a dad. He was terrified. The story he was playing in his mind was that this canoe would be the end of us all. And so I looked down at him, and like any good father, I did what anybody would do, and I tried to reassure him, no, this is safe. This is a safe river. See, in my mind, I had a different story than the story that was playing in the mind of my son. He was imagining a story of death and destruction, the end of the family. I was imagining a beautiful canoe ride with the family up in nature, winding through the Idaho wilderness. And he looked up at me again with those big brown eyes and he said, "Dad, I am scared." And this time it dawned on me that he had a story in his mind that this was scary and it was going to end badly. I looked down at him and I said, "This is scary. And yet you are brave. You, son, are a brave boy." And the story changed in his mind. Now he was on an adventure as a brave boy, winding through dangerous waters with his adventurous dad. It happened that fast. The story in his mind changed. So when I was a little boy, we would oftentimes drive from Alaska to New York. My mom's family lived in upstate New York, and I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska. And it was a long drive. We would drive, I think it was 4,000 or 5,000 miles. I don't have a map right in front of me, but it was a long, long ways. And my dad would usually drive with the older kids, and my mom would fly with the younger ones. And on those trips, my dad would tell us stories. And one story he told on that trip has stuck with me all these years. It's the story of a man who was broken down on the side of the road on a country road. And we understood country roads. We had driven through parts of Canada and parts of the U.S. where we'd travel, in Canada, hundreds of miles sometimes without seeing a gas station even. I mean, just nobody. Empty, barren places. And so this man breaks down on an old country road, and he goes to fix his tire, and sure enough, the jack on his car is missing. It had been taken out to fix a neighbor's car and not put back in place, and so here he is, stranded on the side of the road, no jack. And he starts walking down this old country road, and there's a farmhouse some 2 miles in the distance. Plenty of space for the young man to start to think about his situation and think about his lot in life. And his first thoughts are thoughts of disgust. He says, "I don't believe I'm stupid enough to not put that jack back." And he starts telling himself stories about his own lack of preparation, his carelessness. And then he looks at that farmhouse up ahead, and he imagines going up and asking the farmer for a jack. Now, of course, he's a stranger in these parts, and he doesn't know anybody. And yet he starts to play out this scenario in the mind where the farmer is skeptical of this out-of-towner and is reluctant to give him a jack, to lend him anything. And then he finds himself stranded in the middle of nowhere. Cell phone's not working. Nobody knows where he is exactly. And he just imagined spending a miserable night alone in the car until some poor wanderer traveler comes by and rescues him. He'd built up such a story by the time he came to the farmhouse that now he was imagining a great argument between him and this farmer. him asking for a jack and the farmer saying, who are you that I should give you a jack? And back and forth they would go until it ended up in a fist fight. The farmer turning him down. Now, by the time the young man finally gets up to the house, he's so angry, based on the story that he'd been playing in his mind, that the farmer opens up the door. The young man looks at him right in the eye, and he says, well, if that's the way you feel, you can take your jack and shove it. And he turns around and he marches back towards his car. And I remember hearing that story for the first time and thinking, that's stupid. Why would anybody do that? And yet, we all do it. What is your story about your future? What is your story about your business? What is your story about your relationship that you're in right now? What's the story that you're telling yourself about your children? You see, these stories matter. And the images that we hold in our mind affect the people around us because we treat them differently. There's a famous case of an inner city school who did an experiment. They took a group of average kids and they put these kids in a class and they hired these new teachers who didn't know them. And they told these teachers, these kids are incredibly gifted. These kids are the top of the entire county. These kids are the brightest class and you need to treat them extra well because they are so capable. It was an average class. But the teachers didn't know it, and they started to expect things out of those students, and they started to breathe life into them because they knew how special they were. See, the teachers had a story. A story that these kids were capable of great things. And because they treated them as such, the kids flourished. Because those kids had a teacher with a different story, everything changed. I remember my first martial arts teacher. Well, I guess he was technically my second one. My first one was Marty Lester, great man, my Taekwondo teacher when I was a kid. My second one was a mentor that literally changed my life, someone who I'll forever be grateful for. His name is Charles Scott. And Charles Scott is and was a mighty man. And he managed to get me into his class when I was in my, about my 15th year, 16th year. And a lot of people around me at that point had a story about who I was. I was just a punk kid, right? I was into normal teenage trouble and had gotten labeled by people as being a little bit of a troublemaker and no clear direction. I was just 15. And I responded to that story in a pretty negative way. But along comes a man who looks at me and he believes in me. And I don't know what story was playing in his head, but I can say that his actions and his words breathed new life into me. Because the stories that we carry in our head are stories that we begin to live. We begin to act as if they are true, and because we do, we bring those stories to pass because stories do come true. Something happens to a man, and he decides that he's worthless. He's no good for anything or anybody. And he begins to play the primary character in that story until the world starts treating him like a loser. the man needs a new story. Now, if you don't like the story that you've got, I've got a challenge for you. And that challenge is to change. Change your story. And start to play a different part. Even if the first act in your life was a tragedy, I am here to tell you today that the next chapter, the next act, can be a victory chapter. I believe in you. And I believe in your ability to be the hero, to be the conqueror, and to come out on top. So reach down deep inside. Find your strength and start telling yourself a new story. And when you do, everything in your life will begin to change.
Did you like today's show? If you did, ask yourself this question. Who else might benefit from the information I just learned? All it takes to change someone's life is to share the link to today's show. Will you do that? When you leave a comment below today's post, you'll automatically be entered into a contest to win a copy of the book, Mindfulness, an 8-week plan for finding peace in a frantic world by Mark Williams and Danny Penman. One person who leaves a meaningful comment will win a free copy of the book, Mindfulness, shipped directly to their home or business. To keep getting daily inspiration and motivation, scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your name and best email address to subscribe to The Daily Show, which airs 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Most days, you'll hear from David Wood, my financial freedom mentor. 1 day a week, you'll hear from me. You'll also get several bonuses when you subscribe today, including a free MP3 version of my audio training, Relax. This 40-minute training will teach you how to harness the power of relaxation so that you can beat stress and live a life of peace. When you scroll down and subscribe to The Daily Show today, you'll also get a free PDF of today's message and an MP3 that you can listen to over and over again to reinforce the teachings in today's training. I look forward to seeing you again soon. My name is William Wood, and I believe in you.